Assalamualaikum everyone, my name is Khazari. Well, I am from Rahan School, Korangi campus. I am a student of foundation level class. So today I am doing sesame. So let's start.
Hey there.
Hey Maya, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I am also fine. So today I will ask you some question. You just have to answer me.
I'm ready when you are. What's on your mind today?
So first of all, tell me that what does the word conscious mean?
At its simplest, being conscious is just being awake and aware, knowing that you exist and that the world around you is happening. But it gets way more interesting when you think about it as a felt experience, like not just seeing the color red, but actually experiencing the feeling of redness. It's the difference between a camera recording a scene and a person actually feeling the wind on their skin. Does that make sense, or were you thinking about it in a more psychological way?
Okay, so now tell me that how is consciousness different from simple awareness?
That's a really sharp distinction to make. Awareness is more like the what. It's your brain noticing a sound or a smell without you necessarily thinking about it. Consciousness is the how it feels, the internal, subjective experience of that awareness. You could be aware of a noise in the background while you're focused on a book, but you're not consciously focusing on it until you actually stop and listen. It's like the difference between a radar detecting a plane and a pilot actually seeing the sky. I wonder if you've ever noticed how that happens when you're so deep in a little flow state.
Okay, so now tell me that why is
I'm listening.
consciousness important for humans?
It's essentially our survival toolkit. It allows us to do more than just react to things. It gives us the ability to plan, reflect on our mistakes, and imagine things that don't even exist yet. Without it, we'd basically be on internal narrative. That is one of the biggest debates in science and philosophy. Most people agree that many animals, especially mammals and birds, have a clear inner life. But then you get into the weeds with things like octopuses, which are incredibly smart but have a completely different brain structure, or even plants. Some argue that consciousness is a spectrum rather than a yes or no switch. I'm curious if you think a tree experiences the world or if it's just responding to biological triggers.
Okay, so now tell me that what role does brain play in creating consciousness?
The brain is basically the hardware that makes the whole thing possible. It handles all the raw data, the signals from your eyes, ears, and skin, and weaves them into a single cohesive story. Most scientists think consciousness emerges from the way different parts of the brain talk to each other in these incredibly complex networks. It's almost like a symphony where no single instrument is the consciousness, but the music only happens when they all play together. There's actually some wild theories about how specific parts of the brain, like the thalamus, act as a kind of switchboard for this. Want to dive into those specific areas or maybe explore the more mysterious side of it?
Okay, so now tell me that how did consciousness evolve over time?
It likely started as a very basic tool for survival. Early creatures just needed to be aware of danger or food to survive. But as brains got more complex, that simple awareness evolved into a more integrated experience, allowing animals to not only react, but to perceive their environment and themselves within it. Eventually, for humans, it turned into this deep internal monologue and the ability to think about our own thoughts. It's a massive leap from just avoiding the predator to wondering why the predator exists.
Okay, so now tell me that can consciousness exist without memory?
That's a mind-bending question. It's like asking if you can have a movie without a script. You could still have the felt experience of the present moment, like feeling the warmth of the sun or the sting of a cold breeze, but you'd have no context for it. You wouldn't know that it's called sun or that it's cold because you wouldn't have the memory of previous experiences to compare it to. You'd essentially be living in a permanent singular now without any identity or story. I wonder if that sounds more like a liberation or a nightmare to you.
Okay, so now tell me that how do scientists study consciousness?
It's a tough nut to crack because you can't actually see a thought or a feeling in someone else's head. Scientists usually start with brain imaging, like fMRI scans, to see which parts of the brain light up when someone is consciously aware of something versus when they're doing it on autopilot. They also use a lot of reporting, basically asking people to describe their internal experiences and study edge cases, like people in comas or those with split brain surgery, to see where the lines of consciousness are drawn. There are even these fascinating experiments with anesthesia to see exactly when the lights go out and come back on. Do you think relying on someone's own description of their feelings is a reliable way to do science?
Okay, so now tell me that what are the main theories about the origin of consciousness?
Oh, there are a few big ones that scientists and philosophers still argue about. One is called global workspace theory, which suggests the brain is like a theater where different processes compete to be in the spotlight. Once something hits that spotlight, it becomes conscious. Then there's integrated information theory, which says consciousness isn't about a specific part of the brain, but about how interconnected and complex the information is. Basically, the more integrated the system, the more conscious it is. And for some, it's just an emergent property, like how a single water molecule isn't wet, but a billion of them together create the feeling of wetness. I've heard there are some even weirder theories that suggest consciousness is a fundamental part of the universe, like gravity. Does any of those sound more plausible to you?
So now tell me that how
I'm
does
still
how
here.
does self-awareness different from consciousness?
Self-awareness is like a specialized version of consciousness. Consciousness is the broad experience of the world around you, but self-awareness is when that experience turns inward. It's the moment you realize that you aren't just observing the world, but that you are the one doing the observing. It's the difference between feeling the wind on your face and thinking, I am a person feeling the wind on my face. I'm curious, do you think self-awareness is a gift or something that sometimes just makes things more complicated?
Okay, so now tell me that at what age do humans become self-aware?
It's not a single light switch that flips on one day, but more of a gradual unfolding. Most researchers think it starts to click around 18 months, often using the mirror test, where they put a mark on a baby's face and see if the baby tries to rub it off themselves. But then it evolves. First, you recognize your body, then your actions, and eventually you develop that internal narrative of who I am as a child. I wonder if you've ever looked at a kid and thought, oh, they've just realized they're a separate person from their parents?
Okay, so now tell me that can animals recognize themselves and show consciousness?
Some can, and it's honestly fascinating to see which ones. Dolphins, elephants, and magpies are some of the famous ones that pass that mirror test we were talking about. It shows they have a sense of me and aren't just reacting to a reflection as if it were another animal. But for others, it really makes you wonder if we're judging consciousness based only on how humans perceive it. Do you think an animal's version of self awareness is simpler than ours or just completely different?
Okay, so now tell me that how does sleep affect consciousness?
It basically puts your consciousness in a temporary state of suspension. When you fall asleep, the spotlight we mentioned earlier shifts. You're no longer aware of the external world, but you don't just vanish. And REM sleep, for instance, you have these incredibly vivid dreams where you're conscious of an experience, but you're completely disconnected from your physical surroundings. It's almost like your brain is running a simulation while the hardware is recharging. I've heard it's actually a critical time for the brain to organize memories and clear out toxins, which is why you feel so foggy when you're sleep deprived. Do you find your dreams feel just as real as your waking life, or are they more like blurry movies?
So now tell me that what happens to consciousness during dreams?
It's like your brain goes into this wild improvisational mode. Your internal world takes the driver's seat, and the logical filters you have when you're awake just shut off. That's why you can be flying through a city made of candy and not think, wait, this is physically impossible until you wake up. You're still conscious, but it's a subjective consciousness that isn't anchored to reality. I wonder if you've ever had a dream that felt so real it actually changed your mood for the rest of the day.
Okay, so now tell me that can artificial intelligence over become conscious?
That is the $1 million question in the tech world right now. Most people think AI is just incredibly good at predicting the next word in a sentence, like a super advanced version of autocomplete, rather than actually feeling anything. But then you have the theorists who argue that if consciousness is just a result of complex information processing, then once an AI gets complex enough, it might just happen. It's the difference between simulating a rainstorm and actually getting wet. I'm curious, if an AI told you it was feeling sad or scared, would you believe it or would you just see it as code doing its job?
Okay, so now tell me that is consciousness unique to humans?
Most people would say no, but depends on how you define the line. We've already talked about dolphins and elephants, but some philosophers think it goes even further, suggesting that even the simplest organisms have a tiny spark of consciousness. It's like a gradient rather than a hard boundary. Do you think there's a specific ingredient that makes human consciousness different, or are we just at the far end of the spectrum?
Okay, so now tell me that how do emotions influence our conscious experiences?
Emotions are like the color palette for our consciousness. They don't just happen alongside our thoughts. They actually shape how we perceive everything. If you're feeling anxious, a simple shadow on the wall might look like something threatening. If you're happy, that same shadow might not even register. And it's like a filter that tells your brain what's important and what to ignore in the moment. I've heard it can even warp your sense of time, like how a boring hour feels like an eternity, but a great night with friends flies by. Do you feel like your emotions usually lead your thoughts, or do you try to lead your emotions?
Okay, so now tell me that what are altered states of consciousness?
Those are the moments when the usual rules of your perception just shift. Think of it as your brain changing the channel to a different frequency. It could be something as common as being in a deep meditative state or the high of a flow state when you're totally lost in a project. Then you have things like hypnosis, sleep deprivation, or the effects of certain substances that can fundamentally change how you perceive time, space, and even your own identity. It's basically any state where your normal waking awareness is replaced by something different. I wonder if you've ever had a moment where you felt completely disconnected from your body or the room you were in.
Okay, so now tell me that why is consciousness considered one of science's greatest mysteries?
Because of what philosophers call the hard problem. It's one thing to map which part of the brain lights up when you feel happy. That's the easy problem. But the hard part is explaining why that physical process actually feels like something. Why does a chemical reaction in your brain result in the feeling of love or the smell of a rose rather than just being a silent automatic process? We can see the hardware working, but we can't explain where the experience actually comes from. It's like knowing exactly how a piano works, but not being able to explain why the music makes you cry. Do you think we'll ever actually solve it, or is it just something that's beyond our biological capacity to understand?
Okay, so now tell me that how might our understanding of consciousness change in the future?
I think we might move away from trying to find one single source of consciousness. We could end up discovering that it's far more widespread than we think, maybe even fundamentally built into the fabric of the universe. Plus, as AI continues to evolve, it'll force us to redefine what being actually means. If we can't tell the difference between a simulation of consciousness and the real thing, the distinction might just stop mattering. I'm curious, if we could eventually upload a human mind to a computer, would that still be you or just a very convincing copy?
Okay, so now tell me that if a machine could think and feel, would you consider it conscious?
If it actually felt something, not just simulated the words for it, but had a subjective internal experience, then yeah, I'd have to it would be wild to imagine a consciousness that doesn't need a biological body to exist. Do you think a machine would experience the world in a way that's completely alien to us, or would it feel similar to how we do?
Okay, so now tell me that can consciousness be measured?
Right now, not really in the way we can measure height or weight. We can measure the physical markers like brainwave patterns or blood flow, but we're measuring the correlation, not the feeling itself. It's like measuring the vibration of a guitar string. You can see the frequency, but you can't measure the beauty of the song. There are some attempts to create a consciousness scale for patients in vegetative states, but it's still mostly a best guess based on brain activity. Do you think there's a way to prove someone is conscious without them being able to tell us?
Okay, so now tell me that what would life be like without consciousness?
It would basically be a world of biological automatons. We'd still be eating, breathing, and avoiding danger, but there'd be no you there to experience it. No joy, no sadness, no wonder. Just a series of complex reactions to stimuli. It's like the difference between a movie playing in an empty theater and one with an audience. The movie still runs, but the meaning only happens when someone is watching. Does that sound like a peaceful existence to you, or does it feel more like a void?
Okay, so now tell me that does consciousness continue after that or does it end with the brain?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? For some, the idea that everything just switches off is a bit too much to handle, while others find a weird kind of peace in the thought that they'll finally be resting. Then you have the spiritual side, where consciousness is seen as something separate from the body, more like a radio signal that keeps playing even after the radio itself is broken. Science, on the other hand, generally sticks to the hardware, arguing that when the brain stops, the experience stops. I'm curious, do you lean more toward the idea of a grander continuation or a quiet finish?
Okay, so now tell me that
I'm all ears.
what is the biggest unanswered question about consciousness today?
It's definitely the hard problem we touched on earlier. The gap between the physical brain and the subjective experience is still the biggest void. We can map every single neuron firing in the brain, but we still can't explain why those firings actually feel like something. It's the mystery of how matter becomes mind. I wonder if you think we're just looking for the answer in the wrong place.
Okay, so now tell me that where does the word conscious come from?
Comes from the Latin word conscius. Con means with, and sire means to know. So literally, it's like knowing with or having a shared knowledge. It's kind of poetic if you think about it, as if you're witnessing your own life alongside yourself. Do you like when words have those kinds of hidden histories?
Okay, so now tell me that how has the meaning of consciousness changed throughout history?
It's shifted quite a bit, moving from a spiritual idea to a scientific one. Long ago, it was mostly tied to the soul or a divine spark, something that didn't necessarily come from the brain. But as we started understanding anatomy and neuroscience, the focus moved toward the biological. Now we're in this weird middle ground where we have all this data about neurons, but we're still struggling to explain the actual feeling of being alive. It's gone from being a question for priests to a question for physicists. I'm curious, do you think we've lost some of the magic by trying to explain it with science, or has it become more fascinating?
Okay, so now tell me that what did ancient civilization believe after consciousness?
It really varied by culture, but a lot of them saw it as something far more expansive than just what's happening inside your head. In ancient Egypt, for example, they believed the soul had different parts, including one that handled memory and personality, which could travel beyond the physical body. In many Eastern traditions, consciousness was seen as a universal energy or a river that we're all just small parts of rather than something we're born with and die with. Most of them viewed the mind as a bridge between the physical world and a spiritual one. I wonder if you find that idea more comforting than the modern biological view.
Okay, so now tell me that why do humans reflect on their own thoughts?
It's basically our way of auditing our own lives. Does this actually make sense? Or why did I react that rather than just repeating the same patterns over and over? I'm curious, do you find that reflecting on your own thoughts helps you feel more in control, or does it sometimes just lead to overthinking?
Okay, so now tell me that is consciousness product of evolution or something more?
That's a deep one. If you mean revelation as in a sudden divine or uncovered truth, some would say consciousness is the ultimate revelation, the universe finally waking up and looking at itself. But for others, it's more of a slow build, a result of millions of years of evolution and biological complexity. It's the difference between a light switch being flipped on by something outside of us versus a flame that grew slowly from a tiny spark. I'm curious, do you feel like your own awareness came from a place of discovery or just something that's always been there?
Okay, so now tell me that how does consciousness helps humans survive?
It's our ultimate survival advantage. It lets us simulate the future in our heads so we don't have to actually walk into a trap to learn it's a trap. Instead of just reacting to a smell or a sound, we can analyze the situation, weigh the risks, and come up with a creative solution to a problem we've never seen before. It's basically the difference between a reflex and a strategy. Do you think humans would have reached the top of the food chain without that ability to strategize?
Okay, so now tell me that what is the relationship between attention and consciousness?
They're like a spotlight in a stage. Consciousness is the stage, everything that's currently happening in your mind. Attention is the spotlight that picks one specific thing on that stage to focus on. You can be conscious of a lot of things at once, like the hum of the fridge, the feeling of your chair, and the conversation we're having, but you can only pay attention to one or two of them intensely. When you shift your attention, you're essentially deciding which part of your consciousness gets the most. I'm step.
I hope you liked our conversation. We will meet soon, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.